And that's about the two kind of two types of duties. And I listening to that, I had this contract law in mind, and I tried somehow to connect it to the examiner's question. So I think the point is that if you contrast it to criminal liability, the idea is that in contract law you have this issue: what do we do with all the when something happens outside of the control of the two parties, which makes one of them to breach the contract. And we have this one exception of force majeure and all of this, but mainly the idea is that you're still legally liable for something, even if it's not your fault. And I think it's very interesting to kind of have very interesting evidence for the debate in criminal law to see that the way contract law justifies it is by saying that this is because this is the faultless liability. And we don't have difficulty to impose this type of to find you liable for consequences of something which was behind your control, because we think basically that I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's your fault or not. You're liable for faultless things. And I think when I try to bring it back to criminal law is that that sounds to me like the distinction between the two types of duties that you suggested. I mean, might not be that we might still have duties, but it's not about culpability. And we might, like in contract law, we might still be legally liable and maybe responsible. I'm not sure about that, but we're certainly not culpable. So I'm trying to see whether this distinction between two duties are actually a moral distinction, or we just have two types of duty. One of them is moral duty for things within our control, and the other one is we might have other type of duty which lies behind this game, and there we can refer to contract law as an example of that.
Well, I tried to show where culpability comes in. You know, I mean, so we first of all have to identify what wrong was committed, which means we have to identify the elements of the duty that was violated. The wrong is simply the violation of the duty. And then we always have a question, was it culpably violated? And we got onto that question a little bit when we were talking about justifications and excuses. So when somebody doesn't show up at noon, they violate their duty, but they may have an excuse or even a justification for violating it. And that means that they weren't culpable in respect of the violation. But on that interpretation of the contract, it remains a violation. On the other interpretation, it wasn't a violation of duty at all, because the duty was only to use one's best endeavor. So you made it sound like I was ignoring culpability, but I was putting culpability in its place, namely as a question that arises once we've identified the duty. Now, I don't know why we should want to jump the gun and just start talking about culpability at the beginning. Because there are also, wrongs have all sorts of normative consequences, and only some of them depend on whether they were culpably committed. Now, admittedly, punishment does, and I think criminal liability should as well. So I'm not disputing that. But it still begins with the question, what was the wrong? Not, what was the culpability? So I'm not sure how anything you said countervails against that way of thinking. I mean, it's got lots of interesting features, and the point about the difference between strict liability and fault liability is hovering in what I'm saying somewhere, although I'm not putting it that way. But that, I mean, what I would be inclined to say about strict and fault liability is that duties come in two types in another dimension as well. Some of them require fault as a condition of their breach, and others don't. It's a slightly different, cross-cutting way of carving up duties into types.